Okay, good morning. It's a slow start, of course. It's Saturday morning, and that means it's just been Friday night, and I think that's the reason why maybe people are still wandering up the road. But we'll start in 2 or 3 minutes. So I thought I'd just say a few practical things before we start, like formally. And maybe just go through the program, because it's not that it's complicated, but it's has to do with people either leaving or having to meet up or take bags and things. As we are planning, the first couple of hours will be here, as you know, with Lucy and with Charles, and I'll get back to that, who will conclude formally, you might say, the deliberations we've had on this theme. And then we'll be taking a bus, or actually 2 buses. So at 11 o'clock, if we're on time, there'll be a short break. And then we'll be going to the Aalto University, which is not very far. It's a 10-minute drive. And at the university, we will be greeted by the Group X, as they're called, and they will show or present an exhibition, actually, which is from last August, and that's called Human Cities Challenging the City Scale, which is a European exhibition about European projects, which are looking at innovative ways of, you might say, placemaking and working in urban situations. Then, after a couple of presentations by Antti Elva and Anssi Jutsanaimi, we will again jump on the bus, this time with a packed lunch, and we'll head for the central station to drop some of you off if you have to take flights. And it is such that if we're there at 13:15, you can reckon on being at the airport at about 1400 hours. So if your plane is like around 1500, 1530, 16, you should take that kind of stop off to make it work. Anyway, hopefully the rest of us will be wandering around Kalastama, and this is the, or is it called Fiskehamn, and this is the harbour district in central Helsinki, and Stuba Nikula, and I don't know if Stuba is here. Is he? Okay, Stuba Nikula, he said he would anyway join us here and then be on the bus. And there will also be a sort of short introduction on the bus, actually, as to why we are visiting that area. There'll be 2 or 3 stop-offs in the area, and one of the artists who's been taking part here, the collective Raivi Boman, has also organised some local, you might say, local activities. Is a place she worked in collaboration with when she was doing her in situ art project last year. They are preparing some buns and coffee and stuff. So it's the residents in the area. So after that, we hopefully will just pop by again the main station. So that means we should be at the main station about 14:45. So that means you will be in the airport about 15:30. So if you have planes at 6:17 or 18, you should take that stop off. Okay. This is like a notice board, isn't it? Then we're at the Museum of Finnish Architecture, which is not a huge museum, but we have a space which is, let's put it this way, it'll be quite cozy. I think we're cramming about 70, 80 people. We have 110 signed up for the bus trip, which is really good. So we'll be 70 or 80 people, and there we're having an informal roundup, in a way. We'll also be looking at the exhibition. They have an informal roundup of this lab. And I'd kind of like you to think about what you would like to say, what you have gathered, not a sort of a whole reel off, a long sort of speech, but the main points of perhaps if you found there are things which were interesting and you will take with you. We've also though made sure there are some people who are really prepared. So we've asked Nicholas Wybrow, who is over there, Professor of Performing Arts at Warwick University, to sort of be a a watchdog over the last few days and pick up some things which he has thought were relevant. I've also asked Leah to make notes, as she has been in many of the sessions, also as moderator and also as speaker, to also make some notes. And then I'd really love it if Jana Simula could also say something about what her perspectives are and what she has found interesting or relevant for her.
We should have said that yesterday evening. My mother has been taken to a hospital, so I'm fixing that.
Oh, okay.
Yeah, so if you...
Well, I didn't know that, did I?
I'm telling you now. I didn't want to upset you.
No, okay. All right. Well, look, Luke, we can see if you're there and you're still coherent. You say something. If you're not, we'll take care of you and you know, comfort you.
Yeah.
Okay.
Okay. That's
all right.
good.
Okay. Okay. Then I'd like Leva, where are you? Leva, to also say something and perhaps also focus on these new artistic, you might say, collective actions, because there's been 4 of them actually presented, and I think you followed them all, about what you think is interesting there. Okay. And then we have Evelina Hosia and Pilvi also, and I think the 2 of you have made a presentation together, and the 2 of you are actually trying to start an association of cultural planning Finland, and you are sitting where? You're there, and you will also come with some comments as to what you found might be relevant or daunting or interesting about possible initiatives there. So that will, like, you know, sort of start us off, and from then I think we're going to just roll and see who would like to come with supplementary or personal remarks or things we haven't touched on which were important, you thought. So after that, we're opening the bottles, and I've forgotten to buy the bottles. So on the way, we'll drop up. We'll stop at a supermarket at one of the buses, and we'll buy some bottles of wine and some peanuts. Okay, so we will do that. So that'll be bus number 2, I think. So I'll go in bus number 2 and buy the wine and peanuts and the juice. Okay, and that will be basically that. So we reckon on ending about 4 o'clock. The ones that want to hang around in the museum can hang around until 5. The others will jump on the bus and go to the central station, and that will be for the ones who are leaving like after 8 o'clock in the evening. So that's the final stop. So 3 stops at the station. This is going to take all morning, isn't it? Then the bus will come back here. So if you're staying here like tonight, you don't have to worry about that. You're coming back here. So if you're leaving today, take your bags. If you're not leaving today, don't take your bags. Good. That's the very, very practical sort of, you know, gritty, nitty stuff. And I think we're ready to start. We'll just check. Are you coming in?
Yeah, I'm just waiting. So I'm going up there.
You're going that way. Okay, good. Okay. All right. Okay. So, yeah. So in a way, actually, Lucy has, the title of this, which Lucy Bullivant has prepared, is called Participatory Placemaking Visions into Action Globally. And in a way, it really does capture on the sense of where we were yesterday evening, which was in a way a significant point in this conference, because Franco Bianchini lifted the whole discourse and lifted the whole, you might say, scale of this into a global scale, European global scale, and talked about what we were what was challenging us, not just with regards to, you might say, a narrow concept of placemaking, but actually, you might say, ethical, moral, political survival, in a way, because it seems that he recounted so many threats to the way we were trying to function, modulate our cities, our lives, that he really did draw quite a sort of dystopian picture. But from out of that, we seem to come with some sort of spirits, and I think it was right interesting that we had afterwards the presentation by Anthony and the Assemble collective, who in their own, in a way, naive, but actually completely authentic and believable fashion were trying to carve out their own platform in, you might say, a city which is a global city, London, and trying to manage, in spite of, you might say, horrendous, property prices, and in a situation where it is very difficult to get public support, where the Arts Council has been cut 40% of the grants, so it is a question of survival. And despite that, and despite, you might say, the opportunity for some of them to engage in more lucrative professions, or to actually just think individually, they're sticking together and they're trying to create a very collective, you might say, collective future, which is also engaging citizens and engaging poorer communities or less resourceful communities. And I think that was really not so much an intellectual answer, but it's actually perhaps one of the answers as to how we could and ought to and are reacting. I mean, there are so many examples of artists or culturally led initiatives which are not just waiting and not just hoping, but actually are taking action and making decisions and stepping into the arena and actually doing things on small scales which have really big ideas and could have big consequences. So I think that was, in a way, a really good balance, having, you might say, a very not academic, but an overall and very broad view, and actually see the response by a group of young people who were really understanding that situation and coping with it and managing. So I think that was really very good. And so in a way, what I'm saying is actually that's where we are ending up in our discourse over the 3 days, is this balance between participation, local placemaking, visioning, and actually thinking about what is the global context. So, Lucy, I think it's very good that you came. You've been here for 3 days, so you've actually got to know what we're talking about and where our issues are. Yeah, I'm very much looking forward to what you've got to say. So, thank you, and you're ready to go.
Thank you very much, Trevor. It's a real pleasure to be here, to have been invited to such a cosmopolitan milieu in Finland. My second time in 9 months, and I spoke at the University of Tampere, and third time in Finland, moreover, altogether, including going and having dinner at the bottom of a mine outside Helsinki during the World Design Capital, which was a very it was a participatory experience, I think, the sense of trust. If the lift broke down, we would need to really rely on each other heavily. So the American humorist, the writer Mark Twain, advocated making your vacation your vocation. No, your vocation your vacation. 2 ways. I've made it my vocation to define priorities and strategies for both adaptive planning and placemaking. And participatory placemaking can also be defined as somehow a sense of situating yourself as a citizen, as a citizen of the world, or of your town, your city, your neighbourhood. So I don't like to get too hung up over particular terminologies, but I think I like to explore the multiple meanings of the particular words that we use and see if I can find more, if not contradictions, we'll find more resolutions that are satisfying. So I do a lot of desk research, but the vacation involves interviews abroad, all over the world, investigative research trips to find out. I mean, I'm noticing what's not working, but I'm really my campaign. My goal is to find things that are really working and investigate why they're working so well. So I tell stories about my discoveries in my books. So here is the magazine AD, which I guest edited last year, 4D Hyperlocal, which is about the way in which we can use geolocal technologies and other digital-related sensors and actuators in a way which is very compatible with communities' aspirations for themselves. And I also wrote a book which won an award called Master Planning Futures, which was about turning upside down the whole tired modernist master planning condition, which is really top-down and abstracts not only the green field, but runs the risk of huge social dislocation. And that was a 5-year research project. Then more recently, I wrote together with Thomas Ermacora, the Danish-Italian participatory placemaker. He does this full time. He doesn't write books because they're very time-consuming. This book, which he came to me and said, I need you to help me because I can't write. And I said, you can write perfectly well. Just speak, and then we'll work it out together. And we really were an equitable, balanced, democratic team. If anybody would like to have a look at it, it's got 42 case studies, or rather, I would say, stories of projects around the world, rather than the more sort of dry and technical case studies. I mean, there are actually a lot of statistics in there as well, and heavily supported by brand new infographics, which we commissioned from the design surgery to illuminate processes, which I think is so important. Yeah, sure, yeah. So, yeah. Yeah, so, and then a few years ago, when I had a bit of spare money, I set up my own web scene out of frustration with the lack of, the diminishing opportunities within the print media for independent voices and journalism. And Urbanista is being relaunched after Easter with a new issue, online and physical, Sustainable Urbanism's New Directions, which is specifically focused on the dry lands of the Gulf. Here's my doppelganger, who's busy, Anna Grichting, who's a Swiss architect and professor at Qatar University, and as we speak, she's busily doing photo opportunities, or has been, and they're all on Instagram, with various prominent politicians and industrialists, because it is it's a tough call to promote sustainable urbanism in dialogue with certain characters within the Middle East. But what is so gratifying is to know that there are increasing numbers of sympathisers and people of with prominence who are really entirely on our side, which is a very good move, very good thing to know. So I also curate participatory projects around the world, together with local and international collaborators, architects and placemaking specialists, and occasionally artists. So more on that shortly. But this whirlwind of cross-cultural activity, it also fertilises my consultancy work, which is, where is it? Here, yeah. Here, yeah. I work as a place vision strategist for a local authority in the north of London, Enfield Council, and we're working in Edmonton, which is not only one of the poorest boroughs in London, but in the whole of the UK. It's a post-industrial area. And the council has fallen out already. I should rephrase that more diplomatically, but the council has a very strong ethical vision for equitable growth, and it therefore is doing that through various means of promoting more a diversified economy with higher paid jobs, and also incubating a new cultural cluster. There is already building blocks, the open maker workshop on the site, and this is their organic cafe, and they are, in answer to the woman who asked Anthony about the network yesterday, there is an open lab, there is an open maker workshop network in London. If you just look up open maker workshop, you'll find it. Building Blocks is the most furthest north in London. They're about, goodness, there are more than 20, but every single one is vitally needed as a community resource. And this is a brand new children's play space, playground, play park, moreover. These are 3 children amongst a group of about 10 who co-designed their own park, and it had its soft media launch just last week, which is very exciting. So it takes a whole lecture to unpack such a thing. But Enfield owns 64% of the land already, so they do already have far more, let's say, muscle to make things happen on their own terms, which is very gratifying. So who said it first? And I'm sure somebody said this before the Jan Gehl came along. But first life, then spaces, then buildings. The other way around never works. Now, Jan, who with his psychologist wife Ingrid began researching Italian cities in the early 1960s, explored, as you will all probably know very well, how people really use public spaces and how they really interacted with each other in different contexts. I've been doing, this is a set of their notebooks and memorabilia. I've been doing the same with places that I've visited, making illustrated diaries since I was a child. And I never get tired of such a thing. So I never get tired of asking questions either. So one of the key questions in Master Planning Futures was, why is it that urban plans and human life are so often, on a practical basis, antithetical entities, with one rigidly imposing itself on the intricate organic ecosystems of the other? Growing urbanisation and deteriorating ecosystems affecting cities and their regions make them, as we know, the nexus of mankind's challenges and opportunities. Top-down master planning and conventional policy making are just not delivering the systemic changes needed to secure better living conditions for the 90%. And amongst the high priorities, social equity, environmental conservation, there's a whole heap of them. Surely the perspectives and the sense of cultural memories and the narratives of city dwellers across all generations count for far more than they're being given credit for at the moment. And we have to find alternatives in crises and dig ourselves out of them, and also to alternatives to the extreme centralisation of power, finance, political and administrative decisions governing the development of urban areas, the exclusion of citizens from territorial and urban management in favour of financial and political elites. So participatory placemaking and cultural co-creation, combining top-down and bottom-up strategies, and in the middle, crucially, creating a solid core in the middle as well, so that it doesn't remain a void. Engages citizens in advancing their visions for their cities and towns, teasing them out if they claim they don't have particularly a clear vision. Everyone has aspirations, and it supports their well-being through localized design and self-governance, and it it regenerates, opposite to regulate, it regenerates neighbourhoods affected by financial and social segregation. So with individuals and groups at the heart of urban renewal, we can grow the value of social and cultural capital, and we can build resilience from the ground up, out of the often overlooked existing assets and resources in communities through a range of innovative approaches. So here, for example, is South African architect Michael Hart's generative proposal for versatile new street market infrastructure in Coronationville in Johannesburg. And it enables local people to trade close to where they live, rather than having to travel for 2 hours a day in and 2 hours a day back to their informal settlements. And these kind of low-cost, adaptable interventions, they help to formalise the informal sector, as the architect Hubert Klumpner, the co-founder of Urban Think Tank, puts it. And they maximise the possibility of social, economic, and environmentally sustainable places, more equitable, more open-hearted, and inclusive. So the rise of the human rights movement in the 20th century that we talk about in our book at the beginning, all the very weighty stuff, well, it's all quite weighty, but we try to start very early in the history of human settlements and go right through to the present day. That gave participatory practices a real trajectory of influence. And in our book, we discuss those times in history when questions of human agency were hotly debated by philosophers and other politically inclined individuals. But for a very marvellous contemporary classic encompassing this impetus, 2013, I recommend Handmade Urbanism, From Community Initiatives to Participatory Models, by the German architect Uta Weiland, who was deputy director of the Alfred Herrhausen Society in Berlin, together with the Brazilian architect Marcus Rosa. So books with titles like The Just City, The Endless City, The Rational City, they make it clear just what effort has gone into making cities in ways that don't put human life first. So when I first came to research the book, I found very few extensive publications vividly and with illustrations explaining examples of processes, and very few supported by such means. Now, Marcus Rosa, who's the subjects of one of our stories, he's worked for the last 6 years in Sao Paulo and in Rio, where he's carried out extensive mapping to better understand the identities and the correspondences between things, including existing and potential networks of communication. He quotes along the way the psychologist and human rights activist Nomfundo Waleza, who says solutions to problems germinate in the communities rather than in the boardrooms. Now, we might think that's a no-brainer in many respects. And the graphic of Rosa's here bears out his belief that activating stakeholders at different levels allows for the formation of more complex participatory models, complex but better equipped to tackle the challenges to hand through partnerships that negotiate a common base and also open doors for development. So for his project Edifício Unaio in Sao Paulo, creating affordable housing near to close to the city centre, he and his collaborator Christine Stephanie set in train a process which had far-reaching consequences. And here's one of our infographics to try and illuminate what the series of decisions that were made at different steps along the way. Small yet critical decisions. So firstly, choosing an uncompleted high-rise abandoned by some developer, deciding to retrofit it. Second, cleaning the abandoned concrete frame and installing necessary amenities for living. Creating a semi-public area at the back for recreation set back from the plot edge. Then at this point, media interest was triggered in the project, and 30 engineering trainees offered to help out. Then students from the Faculty of Architecture got involved, and members of the community, people who wanted to live there, people who lived nearby who were interested. So we visualised the sequence of choices made supporting the validity of an alternative future for the building. So 42 families were housed in this scheme. A mix of low-income, disabled and elderly residents. And the consequences of the social capital built were many. So by mixing the urban populations, it helps combat Sao Paulo's high inequality and segregation. By using existing building stock and reducing public spending, it maximises value for landlords. And then it makes best use of a central location closer to residents' jobs. So again, they don't have to spend 4 hours travelling on buses, cutting commuting times, and provides an alternative to slum dwelling, the better quality of life with more dignity and less violence. And there is very often no alternative to creating a viable alternative to equitable growth. Amstel 3, a mono-functional office district in the southeast of Amsterdam with a high vacancy level. If you were to go to Rotterdam, you'd see many of those office buildings around the station are scarcely occupied today. So dying. And the city municipality of Amsterdam failed to get the investment to do anything about it through top-down means, urban regeneration after the global economic crisis. So they handed over the challenge to a Dutch urban designer called Saskia Beer, who's written an essay in my 4D hyperlocal publication all about it. And this highly integrated and actionable online transformation, here we go, wrong, yeah, leapt ahead, transformation dashboard that she created enables citizens, businesses, organisations and the government to directly exchange data and ideas and to collectively plan for change to the district on their own terms. And so the dashboard was part of what she called the ZoCity initiative, involving many, many other offline community activities face-to-face that she pioneered. So we need alternatives. And if we only talk about density and quantitative measures, like a number of architects and moreover almost, very, very many developers do, we risk overlooking the opportunity to catch up. We overlook the opportunity to catch and steer, which is something I think that good architects do very well within society, something richer, social interaction. So the Guatemalan architect, Teddy Cruz, who works amidst the poverty of Tijuana across the border in Mexico in the space between the top-down and the grassroots, not so long ago called for a new system of measuring the success of a city. Why could urban quality not be based on density of population or on the value of turnover and rent, which is the language of developers, but on the frequency of social transactions? That's an alternative. I mean, just talking more doesn't mean to say anything meaningful will necessarily arise, but the breaking down of barriers, transcending obstacles, that's an alternative, that is a vision. And it's not vital, but alternatives very often work when they're based on credible cross-sectoral strategies, lateral strategies, have this solid core that I talked about. The Colombian architect Camille Calderon, whose PhD, Politicizing Participation, when he examines the gap between theory and practice in the field, he makes the essential point that although participatory processes can have highly beneficial results, naturally this depends on the precise social, political, economic processes and dynamics of the context in question. So we have to map a locality's resources with some profundity and the means of access to them, regulations, the other procedures that are already in place, as well as specific identities of civil organisations and other groups of people wishing to play a role in placemaking, but with their own agendas as well that have to be scrutinised. So how can you harness the processes and dynamics of context in a meaningful way? And there is only a very big answer to this, but one, two things, three things is using local materials, drawing out local knowledge, resources and enthusiasm to really institute change that creates a legacy that local people themselves can take ownership of and do something with after architects, designers, planners, artists, placemakers, workshop leaders leave inevitably. And it's a recipe that genuinely helps further their self-determination. Now, I don't claim to have all the answers, but with my collaborators, I make, as a curator, I make fast-track projects, low budgets, shoestring budget projects, bringing people together who've never experienced architecture and design activities before, if they have, and they may be experts in making. They've never been in a workshop environment with their colleagues or their friends or people they don't know to create something new that will represent something about themselves as opposed to something for their bosses. And how they perceive their relationships with their citizen neighbourhoods is a theme that is very important. So, here are some students from the universities of Shenzhen and Hong Kong collaborating with fashion textile workers in the city of Shenzhen on symbolic hanging textiles. And I have to say that this is partly thanks to the Norwegian government that we were able to do this project, because they're very interested in participatory projects. And my collaborator, Alex Furunes, is a young Norwegian architect. So and here are three workers that we collaborated with, and they were in a co-creation situation for an exhibition called Remake, We Make, Frameworks for Social and Cultural Exchange, 2015-16. So I made it together with two Norwegian architects, Alex Furunes and Ivar Tutteren, and Chinese architects known as .A, who also teach. And it was held partly, well, the outcome was held at the Shenzhen Biennale of Architecture and Urbanism in China's Pearl River Delta. Now, textiles as a medium have a long tradition of communicating cultural or social meaning within different communities around the world. And as we know, in society today, this absolute sheer speed of the fashion industry has transformed textiles into a commodity, a product to be bought and sold. And similarly, the role of people who produce these commercialized textiles has become increasingly invisible in this process. So we were working with a small knitted fashion textiles factory in Shenzhen. And as part of the World Factory, if you like, it produced clothes for the likes of, or still does, for H&M and Zara. We worked with 11 factory workers, and one of whom was their boss, with very, very flat management, and it was like a family environment. So for the past 20, 30 years, each one has had a specific role on the production line. So during the workshop, each of the factory workers designed and made one individual textile artifact, a hanging, which we then hung in the old converted flower factory that the Shenzhen Biennale had for its venue. This artifact meant something very personal to them. It evolved from that dialogue, that process of thinking, communicated a message, moreover, that they wanted to share with the world. And so the Biennale, the flower factory, as it was before, we were lucky we got a space next door to the Victoria and Albert Museum's exhibition, which was good. And it featured 5 architectural groups from the UK and Norway, which was Alex, Ivar, and our British collaborator, Clementine Blakemore. So there was... first of all, the visibility that it was manifested as a film compilation by our film director, Paul McHale. We had Assemble, at the time they won the Turner Prize, Workshop, Studio Weave, and 00 Architecture, and Carl Turner Architects, all of whom if you were to check out their sites, and you know a lot about Assemble now, are very committed to a socially driven vision of architecture. So we also needed a local partner, so we teamed up with the two co-founders of Dot Architecture, who are also professors. So in advance of the workshop, we spent months trying to scouring Shenzhen, looking for recycled materials, which are actually quite expensive to buy, trying to find the right local partners and a venue that wouldn't be in the institution of the Biennale, but would be somewhere else. So with a couple of months to go, we honed in on an urban village in Shenzhen, and so many Chinese cities have urban villages. It's called Beishizu. It's one of the biggest in Shenzhen, and as an urban home to many migrants from across the Pearl River Delta and China more widely, it has it's a wide socio-demographic mix. Many urban villages here in the Pearl River Delta they're dense conglomerates of different people from all over China with lots of different building typologies, and they are considerably more informal as communities and places than the more recently developed parts of the city, which are full of more monumental, compartmentalized single formal elements. And many of the urban villages are rich with different areas, different activities and cultures. So we wanted to celebrate Beishizu's innate openness, the organic organisation, the diversity, the multi-party negotiation that went on, like as in most urban villages, that have a real value for people because they can live so close to their home and live so close to their work and avoid a more, suburban commuting kind of in context, environment, way of life. So several of these areas in China are experiencing gentrification, and the urban villages have been considered dangerous and illegal, fueled by bad media stories, but mostly because they're located quite centrally and have a high land value. So the goal was to demolish 20% in Shenzhen by 2010. It was met with really strong community resistance. And Dafeng, urban village in Shenzhen, which supports the art industries, was successfully presented as a very good example of revitalization and has not been demolished at all. So Beishizu is made up of 5 villages which are starting to be demolished. In the northern section, it began in 2016, and more demolitions are scheduled for 2018. It's a typical situation in Shenzhen's population shot up from 300,000 to 20 million. So what's interesting is that the Biennale this year, now we have on the subsequent one, has actually been held in Shenzhen's urban villages for the first time, with the theme of coexistence, so that the curators could examine how people from different backgrounds and social classes can coexist in the city, and how to diversify communities in the process of urbanization. So we, back at the time we made the project, the students were with the workers for 12 days, writing down their stories and assisting them designing the pattern of their own hanging textile. And in the end, the students learned how to knit and make quite a lot of textiles themselves. So joining this big family, they could also begin to understand their hardship and difficulties. And many of the workers left China, places in China for Shenzhen, to work far away from their hometowns, and they're only allowed to go back, only in a position to go back during the Spring Festival once a year to see their families. But in our factory, the manager didn't consider himself to be above anyone else, and did all kinds of menial tasks, which was gratifying. So what made this project work? The very personal nature of the process proved to be a catalyst in building relationships among the factory workers of a new kind, and inspiring some to receive training and engage in other aspects of textile production. And because it was cross-sectoral, it inspired others to engage with the factory group. In Shenzhen, there is a brand new design museum called Design Society, run by the Dutch curator, writer Olle Bouwman. And now the factory workers are making another exhibition with them, which is a rare collaboration in China between an institution and an industrial outfit, between professional curators and industrial workers. So low budget, but really satisfying. And as the architect based at University of Hong Kong, Joshua Bolshova, has commented about China's urban villages, they serve as urban incubators and potentially advantageous test sites for experimental planning policies, such as new environmental regulations or incentives for people to build with improved access to light and air. So in our project, we consider as a social incubator within this mould. So the other project I want to tell you about was also one that involved Alex Farunas, who did all the work on the ground. And it involved an immigrant group living in the city of Sao Paulo. It was a project that we did with Goma Oficina, who are a little bit like a Brazilian equivalent to Assemble. I don't know if there are as many as, is it 18 of them, but they're very multidisciplinary in their talents as well. Maria Cao-Levy was both is an artist and an architect who, together with Alex, did a lot of work. And this collaborative project we staged within the 11th Sao Paulo Biennale of Architecture just last autumn. The Biennale was founded in '73, and it's one of the most important exhibitions in Latin America promoting innovation in architecture. So we worked with 8 members of the CAMI Migrant Support Center, based in Sao Paulo, with the Sao Paulo Metro, very supportive, and with the University Mackenzie School of Architecture, who made the film about the project. So Marcos Rosa, the Brazilian architect that I've referred to before, he directed the Biennale, this time giving it the theme of Proyecto in Project, and he accepted our proposed project because it really closely matched his vision for his Biennale, which was to explore creative bottom-up processes in the making of global cities like Sao Paulo, and to give ordinary people a voice. So it's a long-established cultural platform, and the whole event took place in different public urban spaces, not in art galleries or institutional museums. So the culmination of our project saw the display of 6 pattern banners, each with individual slogans in different metro stations on the red line of the network, which is actually one of the youngest in the world, but also one of the most modern. And the groups chose specifically the busiest line in the system, which carries 4.7 million passengers a day, that is also used by a large number of immigrants. So we centered Frontiera Livre, which means free frontier, around the compelling theme of borders. Over the last decade, the number of immigrants to Brazil has increased by 160%, with some 9.8 million inhabitants. Sao Paulo, the largest city in Brazil, it's a natural magnet for immigrants. Predictably, creating a new life is very, very hard. We have to reorganize ourselves. Who am I? Where do I come from? Each of us has our story, but it's the story of all of us that predominates, explained one of the participants. The group's members had come from Bolivia, Peru, Angola, Haiti, the Congo, and had crossed the border into Brazil, but had regularly faced invisible borders, as you can imagine, of a cultural, social, and economic nature. And we, before planning the banners, each person shared their personal experiences and stories since arriving in the country, including inevitably a lot of negative experience. But going through what you just have to laugh was quite a common refrain. So the banners were approved by the Metro, which already regularly exhibits artwork inside different stations. And each one was chosen for an individual slogan. So in Republica, you had "Leave Fear Aside." These don't entirely match up, but leave fear aside, because as participant Claudine explained, here you can find all kinds of people and you can get really scared. So in the area around Itakere station, where people live in a particularly vulnerable condition, the banner encouraged immigrants to dream, while at Tawa Appe it was about the importance of having strength to just continue. So the symbols on the banners included strength depicted as a snowball, a weighing machine of justice, a megaphone, a square that had been broken through, an open eye, and many more. So how did the professionals and the members of the group share their work? Well, Alex explained that we provided the thematic framework for them, and then the stories and the choices of the patterns and symbols came from the migrants themselves. They also made the banners, as you can see, and each of them with their own printed pattern with 4 lines, words and a symbol. They were beautiful, and he said that after all the work, they really had a clear idea of what the symbols should be. So the project also demonstrated very effectively how participatory practices can bring together specific and diverse groups of people through common goals and through psychological drivers. By exploring creative expression through the sense of togetherness, the participants told us that they overcame feelings of isolation and felt more empowered to deal with urban life. They gain new creative and technical skills that they can use in positive and constructive ways on a smaller or even same scale or even larger scale on future occasions. But perhaps, in their own living spaces, community centres and places of recreation. And Goma Officina has worked with CAMI, with immigrants before, and CAMI has a strong track record in providing valuable orientation to immigrants. However, facilitating them to tell their collective stories through statements and symbols was the first of its kind. And it proved how participatory design and dialogue can strengthen a sense of urban citizenship from something fragile to something much more solid.
Là où monter, il faut qu'on prenne précaution. Milliard, moitié, tuer milo. M'en jamais dit moi licher mon nom. Milo dit moi, fais attention mon nom. La jalousie qui fait mon divaguer. Milliard, moitié, tuer milo. Ou dans le pays, toute bagaille c'est magie. Milo dit moi, fais attention mon nom. M'en jamais dit moi licher mon nom. Milliard, moitié, tuer milo.
Vermelha do metrô para colocar algumas mensagens em relação com os imigrantes.
Tonya saba kufa kuna liberté ya Afrika. Na bato nyonso bakufa mpona bonheur ya baafrikain.
Esse aqui é um imigrante, aquele lá é a autoridade e outras pessoas brasileiras. Aí o imigrante está sempre do lado, sozinho, e a autoridade está olhando para brasileiros, para outras pessoas, está ignorando imigrantes.
Esse aqui é desconhecer. Quando você não conhece os direitos, as leis aqui, você fica longe das pessoas que conhecem. Então você só fica com um pontinho aí, longe. Mas quando você a conhece, você se integra aí.
Bato nyonso bakufa mpona bonheur ya bakongolais. Kasi na nsima na ngai nalingi nayoka ekombo ekoma na kimia. Nalingi nayoka l'unité nationale, amour de la patrie, réconciliation nationale. Soldat basila, la rébellion est là, pour ce pouvoir est là.
Okay, so how can I finish off? Alternative strategies for urban placemaking cannot be both socially driven and beneficial through a distanced top-down approach with minimal or, let's say, only cynical public consultation. Can't be cynical. The newer participatory marshalling processes create test beds of a very valuable nature for enhancing the practices of planning and placemaking by making public interests, innovative sustainable design and green infrastructure the objectives. Taking responsibility for genuine livability gives social capital a high, very high priority, non-negotiable. The work hinges on citizen activism and an interdependent relationship between the expert placemaker and the amateur user of places. And I don't use the word amateur in any kind of pejorative way. The citizen, we are all citizens. We all live in cities or towns or in peri-urban rural areas. We all take part. And so it entails the continuous discovery of human beings' adaptive sensibilities and capacities, as well as the potential of the places themselves and drawing out that potential in the best possible ways. Thank you. And if anyone would like to have a quick look at, this is a prototype. This is a special book that I'm writing and preparing after lots of interviews with everybody for Enfield Council. It's a place book, a unique place in the making. It's not a sales brochure. It's its own genre. It's a charter of principles and thematic strategies for making Meridian Water, the 85-hectare site, post-industrial site in Edmonton, a place that is a place that truly is sustainable of equitable growth. And this is to be used as a tool by all the professional participants in the project. It's something aide memoire to show to all the developers that we'll be working with, architects. Will refer to it. Everyone should see their own ideas and their own beliefs reflected within this, which is why it's gone through a process of wonderfully unruly democracy, because it's both as a Word document and as a layout. Nearly 162 pages, has been commented on by people about 10 times now in 10 processes. Almost I thought I would never see it at the end. But this is we are nearly at the stage, and we'll be launching it in London at the GLA, Greater London Authority, in May. So I can give you a quick look if anyone wants to have a look.
Yeah, thank you very much. I mean, really some compelling and convincing examples, I think. Are there any comments or questions, reflections on that? Yes, if you'd like to.
Hello. My question's about so people normally who are at the sort of strategy planning, master planning, but the design end, aren't often the people that go and actually physically work with the participants. There's a kind of element of hands-on, if you like, dirty work. Literally getting your hands dirty. In the work you've been doing, are they the same people, or is there a distance between the people? I mean, you've described doing desk research, and obviously going to meetings and all those kinds of things takes up a lot of time. Do you go and directly work with the communities that you're? How does that work? In other words, that joining up.
Well, with the division of labour with myself and Alex. Because he's he's led a lot of workshops. He was the one doing them on the ground, working directly with students. But I have been a professor and I have taught and I have taken students on field trips. But we just made that pragmatic decision that it was in our best interest that we each diversify what we were doing. But I think I could stand in for Alex with a little bit of work, and he could stand in for me because he's been getting grants for his work. He does post-disaster reconstruction projects in the Philippines and other places, and he's used to going to lots of agencies to get funding and support and so on. But when it comes to the bigger picture of architects and planners more generally, everyone is an individual, and everyone is using their best capacities to be productive and creative and make a positive impact within society. And it is true that many architects are not particularly at all interested in being participatory placemakers. They don't really relish the public consultation that is required as part of projects where you have to meet with people, and they feel stung if they get negative feedback. But I mean, I wouldn't be so sympathetic, because I think architects also they're very used to having negative comments. But some prefer to keep a more distanced relationship with people on the ground, because I think possibly also they have seen projects be stopped, or if there is an element of controversy. But I can't so much speak for them and their own consciences, but I think the fact is that there are a younger generation of architects are spectacularly good at doing social projects. I've noticed that they come as facilitators, and they come with multiple skills, as Alex and Maria do, everything from making sets to graphic design, like Assemble, and they are really curious and keen to learn and so on, and not. I mean, there are community planners. The man who facilitated the Ladyship children's play park in Edmonton, Phil Heaton, is a landscape architect and a community facilitator. So he's the one that has worked with the school children for 2 years. He set up competition for them and so on. And they look to him. Probably the first time that they ever really met and got to know an architect. So he stands in their eyes as an image of what an architect is really going to be. They don't need to read about Ayn Rand or Corbusier necessarily. It's someone human in the flesh in front of them who's helping them, and inspiring them to create their own badly needed play space.
Okay, thank you.
One thing was, I think, very strategically anyway, very daring, you might say, is the last project where you showed that the work was actually presented in the, you might say, the main metro stations where you're in contact with potentially 4 million people a day.
Right.
Where you're stepping into the public space, where it's very clear that this could also be either interpreted or misinterpreted as a political action or an aggressive step in which you're going into and creating I suppose, you're losing control of actually the work, because how it gets interpreted and how it gets misused and discussed and whatever, and the social media and newspapers. Are you aware of when you do that, you are actually in the public space and it may create turmoil or discontent or disruptions? And were the people you engage, the immigrants, aware that they are actually doing that? How do you, because that's one thing I've always actually doing you might say a similar kind of project where we had 100 refugees telling their stories, but then their stories become public, and are they equipped to answer, to discuss, in the public discourse? How did you think about that, and did you manage it at all, or did you say, no, it's a work of art, it stands there, it can be interpreted, how it's interpreted, we don't care, we don't either protect it or you might say support it? How do you deal with that?
That's a very good question. I think that's a question that maybe that Marcus Rosa, as the director of the Sao Paulo Biennale, could better answer, because he after all, he has experienced all the projects that he staged in public spaces throughout the whole period of the Biennale. I mean, if you think of our London Metro, when do you ever see... You don't see artworks per se. You see very creative advertisements. You rarely see graffiti, because the moment someone comes up with an aerosol can, they're going to get escorted away. So, you know, at least in the subterranean lines anyway. But that's a really good point. Whether they would feel intimidated or empowered by... I think probably some nervousness if there were to be some public forum actually in the station. I think that it was programmed to avoid such direct confrontation with people who might be adversarial. That's for that's definitely going to be the case. You know, when there are planning appeals, and they always allow members of the community to come and give their views, and they're given a very short window of time to say what they think, and sometimes they're hugely fed up and irate, but the process only allows them to speak for a limited time. And I don't know whether Marcos is interested in generating a bit of a kind of steam of aggressiveness, or I think it's fair to say probably like to keep it at arm's distance. But nonetheless, there is a case, you know, it's a bit like, I didn't want to mention Brexit, but it's painful. I'm a completely devout Remainer. It's a religion to be a Remainer in the EU for me, but and it's been very painful having discussions with family members and friends who are pro-Brexit. And when you're on Facebook, you can have discussions about Brexit with all your pals, and everyone is similarly irate about the whole Brexit thing in the first place. But I wonder, I think sometimes there is a value in Remainers speaking to Brexiters to try to get to the bottom of motivations.
Well, I just think it was a very brave, anyway, statement to have, a very bold statement to actually make in this obviously very public space, and to actually take the chance and the risk that. I think that's what we often lack in a way, because it was obviously very authentic. It wasn't, you might say in a way, professional. It wasn't advertising. It wasn't information. It was actually quite a statement. Okay, yes.
Thank you, Lucy, for a very illuminating presentation. Really, very thought-provoking. I was thinking we have been having a very, I think, important points during these days about going from beyond nice to actually creating, like having a political comment or catalyzing change. And Lina pointed out a beautiful expression, how to get the learnings, the understanding of what comes out of it into the so-called bloodstream of the cities, actually into the system again. In your experience of Shenzhen and Sao Paulo, how did the municipalities approach you? Was there interest, was there interaction of what this project in a way taught, and how did it continue in the more, let's say, structural municipality of the city?
Well, because we were working like Russian dolls within a larger Russian doll of the biennales in both cases, the direct relationships were between, obviously, the local municipality and the Biennale organisations themselves. Now, I know in the case of Sao Paulo, Marcos Rosa has good contacts with the municipality and with political figures throughout the city. I mean, the political situation in the macro sense is somewhat more is not so favourable. But there are always individual. I think curators do themselves justice when they seek out individual, positive, sympathetic, supportive political figures. In the case of Anna Grichting, who makes it her business to know everybody, to engender, because it's such a learning experience, so educational. You can listen to what they have to say as well. Create a threshold of understanding. In the case of Shenzhen, I think Shenzhen Biennale is the organisation is young and very go ahead, and it's largely funded by a big developer doing all kinds of things, and the team, they're very used to. 2 hours before the press view, the whole venue is visited by the people who come to check that there are no elements of the texts or the visuals that are construed to be political in a way that the government doesn't like. And then certain things are taken out always. So there's a bit of a joke amongst the architects that if you overstep the line, and you're never really going to know what you've done that might be too much, that your thing is just unceremoniously stripped off. But in our case, we had our video with barely, well, it's got talking on it, but it hasn't got text, and we installed our hangings halfway through, so our installation was quite minimal, quite experiential with the video and our book available. And then at a certain point we installed our hangings. And the hangings themselves had, as you could see, had attachments, the little papers explaining in Chinese what the whole project was about. And there's a deep meaning, but people came with their families and the children played underneath and inside the hangings and so on. So we had people from Design Society, the new design museum, and there are politicians who are there in Shenzhen who are very much in favour of that. But Chinese policy within Shenzhen about promoting design as design capacities amongst people. I think perhaps we're in and Ola Baumann, the Dutch director of Design Society, is totally of this mind that there are ways and ways you can play complex political conditions to your advantage, so that you mitigate the elements that don't work in your favour and draw out the elements that are going to give you some support.
I mean, the significant thing, or one significant thing, is of course if these particularly with the visual arts biennale, they are extending their remit to actually be the whole city. So in a way, you might say they are also defining a new cultural space. So within that, they have a certain amount of power and a certain amount of resilience and opportunity to actually have, not determine, but actually have influence the way the city is developing and thinking. I think that stepping outside of, you might say, building-bound institutions into the city is of course a major trend, and that reflects it. And that perhaps might lead us on to the next thing. So because in a way it's all about understanding the psychology of the city and how to work with the psychology of the city, which is one of Charles's recent books, and perhaps something he will touch on. So I'd like to say thank you very much to Lucy, and then we'll try to ensure that Charles doesn't collapse here. Now, do we want a 1 minute break just to sort of get